This is one of the most perplexing moments in Joseon history. A formidable fleet of over 300 Japanese warships was advancing menacingly. Yi Sun-shin, the supreme commander of the Joseon Navy, ordered the burning of his own army's camp. Houses, military tents, and all foundations on land were reduced to ashes under his calm gaze. The soldiers were terrified and confused, unable to comprehend why their general would cut off their retreat on the eve of a decisive battle. Was this sheer madness or a supreme strategy to fight with their backs against the wall? The story begins a few months earlier. In 1597, after Yi Sun-shin was framed and imprisoned, he was not only dismissed from his official position but also tortured. Following this, the Joseon Navy suffered consecutive defeats against the powerful Japanese fleet. Since Japan invaded Jeolla province, it has been heading straight for Hanyang in Joseon. The Joseon Navy was nearly annihilated in the Battle of Myeongryang, with only 12 warships escaping. With no one else to turn to, Joseon had to reinstate the wronged naval admiral Yi Sun-shin. After his release, Yi Sun-shin rejoined the military as a civilian. Due to the urgency of the situation, he was once again appointed as the commander of the Joseon Navy. Upon assuming his post, Yi Sun-shin's first task was to reorganize the Navy and repair the turtle ships. His plan to confront the Japanese Navy with only the remaining 12 warships was met with opposition from many generals. At that time, in the grand tent of the Joseon Navy, the assembled generals were filled with anxiety and fear. The ministers were in disarray, arguing endlessly. Some advocated abandoning the naval route and merging the remaining navy into the army. They believed that facing 300 Japanese warships with just 12 ships was like trying to break a rock with an egg. This was not only a military gamble but also a futile sacrifice of thousands of soldiers' lives. Yi Sun-shin understood that there was a vast difference in strength between his navy and the Japanese navy, but he did not want to see his generals so timid. At this moment, Yi Sun-shin felt physically and mentally exhausted. Not only did he have to worry about major military affairs, but years of imprisonment had also left him with serious illnesses. Meanwhile, in the camp of the Japanese invaders, there was an atmosphere of triumphant celebration. They were strong and had an unprecedentedly large fleet. Several corps generals were gathered around a map, discussing how to divide the spoils of victory. Their goal was clear: to break through Joseon's last naval defense line, advance along the water route, and capture Hanyang to seize the Joseon king. They even invited the notorious pirate king Kurushima Michifusa to lead the destruction of the Joseon Navy. In their eyes, the Joseon Navy was already on the verge of collapse. Yi Sun-shin, who had once made them tremble with fear, was now just a recently released prisoner. Moreover, with only 12 dilapidated ships under his command, he posed no real threat. Victory seemed within their grasp. They were extremely brutal, slaughtering numerous Joseon soldiers and civilians. However, the Joseon military was not lacking in brave warriors. Despite being outnumbered, the soldiers launched a charge against the invaders. This grim news soon reached Baibop Bay. Everyone learned from intelligence reports that the Japanese army was advancing towards Hanyang, burning, killing, and looting along the way. Hearing this, Yi Sun-shin sensed the crisis. If things continued this way, the Joseon military and people would cease to exist. Then, Yi Sun-shin took out a secret letter and handed it to the man, instructing him to deliver the letter at all costs. This man was an ordinary civilian. With the great battle approaching, only by uniting the military and the people could they stand a chance against the Japanese invaders. His wife was a mute, fully aware of the danger her husband faced with every mission, understanding that each farewell could be their last. Meanwhile, in a large Joseon army camp, the Grand Marshal received Yi Sun-shin's request for support. However, the army commander insisted that the land battlefield was the top priority and that sending reinforcements was impossible. All of this was overheard by a Buddhist disciple. At this moment, a mysterious ship arrived at Baibop Bay. The severed heads hanging from the mast terrified the soldiers and civilians alike. Even Yi Sun-shin, who rushed to the scene, felt a sense of unease. When the grass mats on the ship were lifted, countless severed heads were revealed. Such cruelty was clearly the brutal and despicable tactics of the Japanese invaders, aimed at spreading fear throughout Baibop Bay. Yi Sun-shin faced an incredibly difficult situation. Externally, powerful enemies were pressing in. Internally, the court was hindering his efforts. His men are demoralized, and there are even desertions. To stabilize the troops, Yi Sun-shin executed the deserters on the spot. The expressions on everyone's faces were complex, and some harbored resentment toward Yi Sun-shin. Yi Sun-shin knew that a head-on confrontation would not lead to victory. He placed his only hope in a special location, the Myeongnyang Strait. This was a narrow waterway with rapid currents and numerous hidden rocks. An elder suggested that the only way to fight here was to use Joseon's powerful turtle ships to lead the attack, disrupt the enemy formation, and exploit the narrow terrain to neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. At night, Yi Sun-shin faced immense pressure from his son's pleas to retreat and his subordinates' despair. Alone in the empty room late at night, he seemed to hear the wails of countless souls who had perished in the Battle of Myeongryang. Yi Sun-shin suddenly woke up and was then shot with a dart. Fortunately, his son Yi-ho quickly intervened, or Yi Sun-shin might have lost his life. Then came a devastating blow. The turtle ship, which was the core of the tactics, was burned in a fire. This specially modified flagship, in which so much hope had been placed, was reduced to ashes in the blazing fire. This was undoubtedly a precise act of enemy sabotage, undermining Yi Sun-shin's plan. Looking at the burnt remains of the turtle ship, he fell into great pain and despair. But he knew he could not retreat, for behind him were countless civilians of the nation. If the naval defense line were breached, the Japanese armies burning, killing, and looting would face no obstruction, and all of Joseon would become a living hell. It was at this moment of despair that Yi Sun-shin made a shocking decision. He ordered the burning of the military camp. He set all the barracks and supplies ablaze. From this moment on, they had no base and no retreat. All their hopes rested on these 12 ships. They would either win victory at sea and rebuild their homes, or, as the nation's last line of defense, sink with the sea. He used the fire to burn away the soldiers' last dependencies and fears, turning their despair into the courage of a desperate struggle. He made every soldier understand that in this battle, it was victory or death. A young man, whose father was cruelly killed by the Japanese, also requested to board Yi Sun-shin's warship. Even if he could only be an oarsman, he wanted to avenge his father. Civilian ships spontaneously gathered behind the Joseon Navy. Although they could not directly participate in the battle, they wanted to show the soldiers that they were not fighting alone. Military and civilian morale reached its peak at this moment. On October 26, 1597, after paying respects to his mother's spirit tablet, Yi Sun-shin personally led 12 warships into battle. To better prepare for battle, he concentrated all his fierce warriors on the main ship and ordered the civilians to evacuate Hainan Island and hide deep in the mountains. Yi Sun-shin then commanded the warships to line up in a single file. Under the direction of the signal officer, the oarsmen below deck used all their strength to turn the bows of the ships. Facing the whirlpools of the strait, the oarsmen had to exert even more effort to advance. If any oarsmen became exhausted, the monk soldiers behind them would take over. At the entrance of the Myeongnyang Strait, a massive fleet of over 330 Japanese warships slowly approached. On the flagship, the pirate king Kurushima Michifusa and his samurai were eager to taste victory. On the other side, Yi Sun-shin, clad in armor, stood on his flagship with the remaining 11 warships behind him. One of the most incredible confrontations in the history of naval warfare was about to begin in this roaring strait. Facing such a vast disparity in strength, the civilians on the shore were terrified. This was the boundary between life and death and the last hope of a nation. The battle drums roared like thunder, and a fate-deciding naval battle was about to commence. Confronted by an enemy fleet many times their size, the soldiers of the Joseon Navy were filled with anxiety and unease. They knew that defeat in this battle would mean the destruction of their country and homes. However, under the command of General Yi Sun-shin, everyone understood that there was no retreat. They had to fight with their backs to the wall. The general stood on the flagship, his gaze fierce. He was well aware of the enormity of this battle and the expectations of the countless civilians behind him. The soldiers stood ready, their eyes reflecting not just fear, but a resolve to defend their homeland to the death. At this moment, Yi Sun-shin even gave the order to drop anchor and choose to face the enemy alone. From the enemy's perspective, Yi Sun-shin's warship appeared even more solitary. With Kurushima Michifusa's command, the first assault team struck instantly. Sun-shin also issued his orders, and the soldiers busily prepared the cannons. Meanwhile, the oarsmen below deck controlled the oars, changing the formation of the originally straight warships. As the enemy drew nearer, the soldiers readied their bows and arrows, awaiting the command.
Get ready to fire!
Under a single order, the Japanese vanguard fired their bullets. Although hit by the enemy's first wave, Sun-shin did not hastily retaliate, but waited for the optimal moment. He chose not to confront the enemy head-on, but cleverly utilized the unique geographical advantages and turbulent currents of the Myeongnyang Strait. The enemy pressed forward, puzzled as to why the other side had not yet opened fire. As the distance closed, they were almost within reach, as if victory was assured. At this moment, Sun-shin struck heavily as the enemy ships lost direction. In the first wave of attacks, the enemy suffered heavy casualties. However, facing the Japanese pirates' fierce counterattack, although there were casualties on his side, their combat effectiveness was not significantly diminished. Under another command, the warships swiftly changed direction again, using cannons to deliver a heavy blow to the enemy. The enemy commander terrifyingly realized that this battle was far more difficult than they had imagined. At this moment, Kuroshima Michifusa, seeing his vanguard completely defeated, could only issue the command for a second attack.
I'm going to advance!
But just then, due to the tidal effects of the sea, Sun-shin's ships also encountered uncontrollable situations. Although his warships had dropped anchor, a cannon shot still went astray. Sun-shin then ordered the anchor to be cut and decided to fight along with the direction of the water flow. As the ships were about to crash into the hidden rocks, the oarsmen in the cabin took up bamboo poles to fend off the rocks, while the oarsmen on the other side rowed vigorously. Facing the enemy's fierce attack, the Joseon Navy clearly could not hold on. Sun-shin then ordered not only the replacement of cannonballs with scattershot, but also for the soldiers to prepare for close combat. Even the monk soldiers rowing in the cabin took out their weapons. As the ships of both sides drew closer, the Japanese used muskets for cover and then threw out ropes, strenuously pulling the ships closer. Thus, the soldiers of both sides instantly became embroiled in a melee, with even the commanding Sun-shin using his bow and arrows. With the increasing number of Japanese ships, the Joseon soldiers suffered heavy casualties. The Japanese not only had more manpower, but also used primitive cannons, nearly hitting Sun-shin with one shot. Seeing this scene, the Japanese commander nearby was confident of victory. At this critical moment, a soldier suddenly ignited the nearby gunpowder. Sun-shin struggled to his feet and, with the help of his subordinates, made his way to the side of his deputy commander. He ordered all the cannons to be concentrated on the starboard side of the ship. Under the deputy commander's orders, all the oarsmen gathered the cannons. To buy time, Sun-shin led by example, wielding a samurai sword to strike down the enemy. When he heard the deputy commander's shout from the cabin, Sun-shin knew the moment had come. As Yi Sun-shin stood up again, the fighting spirit of the Joseon army was instantly reignited. Even the Joseon civilians on the shore were filled with excitement. Under the deputy commander's orders, everyone began to fiercely strike down the remaining enemies on the deck. Kurushima Michifusa, realizing that a swift attack was the best strategy, prepared to join the battle personally. Observing the Japanese movements, Yi Sun-shin issued a signal command. However, just as the deputy commander raised the command flag, he was suddenly shot down. It turned out there was a sniper hidden on the opposite side, with precise aim. Yi Sun-shin lit the cannons, and although they did not hit the target, they affected the sniper's vision. The sniper aimed at Yi Sun-shin, but an arrow shot into her eye. With a scream, he fell into the sea. At this moment, a ship filled with straw and even gunpowder was heading towards Yi Sun-shin. If the two ships collided, it would be a catastrophic explosion. Seeing this, Yi Sun-shin ordered his soldiers to shoot flaming arrows at the straw ship. However, the ship did not catch fire because the straw had been soaked in water beforehand. Meanwhile, the main warship, after two major battles, had water seeping into its cabin. The oarsmen on the straw ship also broke free from their chains. This man was the informant for General Yi Sun-shin. It turned out that he had encountered an accident while on a mission. He was carrying a map to survey the Japanese deployment when he discovered the brutally murdered bodies of his compatriots. To avoid arousing the enemy's suspicion, he blended into the group of prisoners. He then picked up the wooden barrel on the boat and reminded Yi Sun-shin that the straw boat was full of explosives. Noticing that the Joseon Navy had received the message, he climbed onto the deck, intending to control the rudder and change the ship's direction. Suddenly, a shout came from the shore. It was his wife, frantically waving at him. At that moment, a long sword pierced his body. In the nick of time, several arrows shot and hit the Japanese soldier. His wife, to ensure her husband's sacrifice was not in vain, instantly untied her long skirt and stood on the mountain, waving it vigorously. The civilians on the shore also understood her intention. Seeing the straw ship about to collide with General Yi Sun-shin's ship, the deputy commander ordered a direct cannon strike. With a violent explosion, Yi Sun-shin's main warship was saved. However, the woman's husband had left her forever. Seeing his plot completely destroyed, Kurushima Michifusa turned his ship around and charged straight at Yi Sun-shin. Just as Kurushima Michifusa was about to rush towards Yi Sun-shin, his warship was hit by a cannon. It turned out that Yi Sun-shin's reinforcements had arrived from behind. Under the deputy commander's orders, countless cannonballs were fired at Kuroshima Michifusa. Seeing this, Kuroshima Michifusa's subordinates requested reinforcements from the rear. However, Kuroshima Michifusa knew in his heart that Todo Takadora would not support him. At this moment, although Kuroshima Michifusa was on the verge of total annihilation, he did not lose heart. He wielded his samurai sword, causing heavy casualties wherever he went. Just as he was about to reach Yi Sun-shin, countless arrows shot and hit him. But even so, he stood up again. At this time, as the enemy's horn sounded, Wakisaka Yasuharu finally launched an attack. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers surged like tides, trying to overwhelm the Joseon Navy with sheer numbers. The sea was filled with debris and bodies, and the battle was extremely fierce. The soldiers of the Joseon Navy fought bloody battles, refusing to retreat. Yi Sun-shin not only had to face the Japanese attack again, but also had to deal with even more turbulent whirlpools. At this moment, looking at the soldiers who had been through life and death battles by his side, Yi Sun-shin's heart was filled with complex emotions. Suddenly, countless ropes were thrown onto the ship, and the civilians desperately pulled the main warship. At the same time, he once again utilized the currents of the strait, turning the enemy's charge into a trap. With the united efforts of the civilians, the main warship was finally pulled out of the whirlpool. In the end, under the brave command of General Yi Sun-shin and the bloody battles of the soldiers, the enemy completely collapsed and began to retreat. Victory cries echoed across the sea, and the soldiers cheered, having survived the disaster. The smoke cleared, and the sea returned to a brief calm. The soldiers, although exhausted, had faces filled with the joy of victory. However, General Yi Sun-shin's gaze was fixed on the distance, deep and worried. He knew that this was only a temporary victory, and the mission to guard their homeland continued. This great victory highlighted General Yi Sun-shin's outstanding military talents and firm beliefs, and further proved the fearless courage and sacrificial spirit of the soldiers. Their story will forever be engraved in the long river of history, inspiring future generations.